Welcome to the SVRI's and World Bank Group's webinar on our new Voices from the South series. I am Liz Dartnell, Sexual Violent Research Initiative's Executive Director, and have the privilege to open this webinar for the launch of the report on research that the SVRI and the World Bank Group have supported in Asia. This is one of a series of publications we will be sharing with you over the next few weeks. But before I start, I want to share today's agenda. But before I share today's agenda with you, first some housekeeping. We are together for an hour to share and discuss research on violence against women in Asia, and the event platform that we're using is Zoom webinar, and the webinar is being recorded. Our online participants will be muted for the duration of the event, but for those of you online with us today, we please invite you to share any questions that you have in the chat, and we also invite you to introduce yourself and tell us where you are in the world. The webinar recording will be shared with you all via email and will be uploaded to the SVRI and the World Bank Group's websites. Wordly is available for translation into multiple languages. Wordly is a software package that provides translation generated by artificial intelligence in real time into multiple languages. To use Wordly in this Zoom session, if you see on the left-hand side of your screen, you see custom live streaming service. So click down on the custom live streaming service and then select view on custom live streaming. This will launch Wordly in a browser. Then select the language of your choice and resize the window so you can both see the Wordly translations and the Zoom session. Liesl, our producer for today, will also have shared the link in the chat. Now to our agenda. We have a packed agenda for you today, filled with extraordinary researchers and practitioners. We have Maria Beatrice, the World Bank Group's representative for Asia, who will start the webinar off with a presentation on research on violence against women in Asia. Maria Beatrice's presentation will be followed by a panel discussion moderated by Diana Arango, Senior Gender Advisor at the World Bank Group. Diana and our panel of experts will discuss the importance of research on violence against women in low and middle income countries and the importance of such research being led by low and middle income country researchers. On our panel is Sangeeta Ray from Anderson Trust in India, Bim Reddy from the Institute for Human Development, also from India, and Dusita Kung Samran from the Institute for Population and Social Research, Mahidol University, Thailand. We will then end the panel with a presentation from our very own Angelica Pino, SVRI's grant manager on the Voices from the South Asia report. After which we will endeavour to answer all your questions, so please do write them in the chat. We are really going to be busy over the next hour. So I'm going to hand over directly to you, Maria Beatrice, to talk about research on violence against women in Asia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good evening, and good night to all our participants. Just a quick audio check. Can you hear me properly? Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Liz. So South Asia is a region, and you know, all of you know this, but I just wanted to start with this common knowledge that we all bring to the table. It's a region of very high levels of prevalence of gender-based violence in different manifestations. Of course, some are quite prevalent in the region, such as child marriage and sexual violence in urban public spaces, and definitely all of these has been in the headlines and in our day-to-day lives and the lives and media as well. In the graph, we have the traditional intimate partner violence data that comes from WHO. This is the latest data. You can see that even though overall is a region with very high prevalence of intimate partner violence, particularly lifetime prevalence, which is the lighter gray in the graph, some countries really deserve more attention. Afghanistan and Bangladesh have rates that go beyond 50%. So 1 out of 2 women in Afghanistan and Bangladesh has experienced lifetime intimate partner violence. And the other countries like India, Sri Lanka, and Nepal, you see a more typical sort of 1 in 3, which is the global estimate. So I just wanted to just provide that context. And with this, I go to the next slide, and I'll try to summarize a little bit of the latest evidence of what works to prevent and address GBV in South Asia. I have to qualify Lisa's very generous presentation said that I was going to talk about research in the region. The body of research in South Asia is very large, including a lot of research done within country by local think tanks, amazing universities across the region. So it is impossible for me in 10 minutes to summarize that body of research. But what I'll try to do is talk about impact evaluations, talk about what we know from rigorous evaluation on what works. And then even within the what works, I'll tackle a particular segment that is very important for the World Bank Group and its operations, which is the relationship between women's economic empowerment and gender-based violence. So it's a small segment of that big body of evidence. So bear with me, and I hope you find it interesting. So in terms of the state of the evidence on what works, I would say that we have more evidence on the best design interventions, which is a weird place to be in a region. It's a good start, I would say, because in some regions we really are deprived of evidence, and like it's sort of like a data poor environment, or there are gaps of evidence everywhere. So in South Asia we have a lot of evidence, but the evidence really is on the pilots, interventions, programs that were designed by gender experts, GBV experts, development partners, governments, with the intent of addressing and reducing GBV. And therefore, because of this high awareness, there was an impact evaluation or an evaluation associated. And we are learning from that. We are learning tons about implementation, about design. But it's a corner on the what works. And it gives us a very big blind spot. The blind spots are a lot of interventions that are designed towards gender equality or to benefit women, and other development interventions that may have huge impacts as per the Lori Heise's model, the risk factors on GBV and the intergenerational transmission of GBV, that we don't know their effect. So we know a lot about the specific programs that were designed to address and prevent GBV, and we know very little about other programs that impact gender equality, that measure other outcomes, but they don't measure GBV rigorously, and they don't, in particular, they don't evaluate whether there are interventions within those programs that could really, really help in terms of addressing and preventing gender-based violence. So from what we know, in terms of the evidence you can see in the slide, we know that family and community level and norm change interventions work, like Al-Assasa. That's very similar to the global evidence. I would say that's the same in South Asia. School-based interventions also work. The evidence is really promising. Self-defense training, any trainings that empower girls, empower women, and that specifically carry a GBV prevention mindset seem to work really well. That's what we're learning. And same interventions connected to reproductive and maternal health, as long as they, of course, have in the design prevention of GBV. Interventions with men and boys. Here, the evidence is a little bit more mixed, but we do have some interventions that are quite promising. And interventions that tackle substance abuse and alcohol prevention seem to be promising as well. This is all very similar to the global evidence. I would add a refinement to the last finding, which is that substance abuse and alcohol prevention work in contexts like India, Sri Lanka, but they either don't work well, or we don't have enough information in countries that ban alcohol, like Bangladesh and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So again, we either don't know, or they simply, because their usage is relatively low, supposedly, we don't know enough. With this, so this is the overall evidence, and with this I'm going to go to the particular paper that I wanted to talk to you about today, and if we go to the next slide, which is on women's economic empowerment and IPV and South Asia. This was a paper commissioned by the World Bank South Asia Regional Gender Innovation Lab. And the objective, as I mentioned, is to identify women's economic empowerment programs that measure intimate partner violence or child marriage. We had a two-part program here. and have been effectively evaluated in South Asia. This paper was authored by Anais Williams, and huge contributions also by my colleague Jayati Sethi. So thank you to both of them. We go to the next one. It's a rigorous, systematic, exhaustive evaluation on what works. So I hope we can disseminate it soon so you can see the methodology, and it's quite rigorous. Summarizing very quickly, we see that increased access to credit and assets could, and I think this is something that is also known in the global evidence, could either decrease or increase GBV because because of the household income effect, because it empowers women, because it alters the bargaining power within the household, but also it could lead to some backlash because of the disruption of gender norms. So we know from the theoretical framework, and we know from the global evidence and South Asia evidence, that this relationship is not necessarily linear, and we know that it's not necessarily the case that women's economic empowerment automatically leads to reduction in GBV and IPV. It could go either way. So if we go to the next one, that's of course the first finding, which is kind of standard. In South Asia, we find in the review of programs that this complex relationship actually is reflected in the data and all the interventions that were reviewed. So one big conclusion, and this is consistent with the global evidence, is that for the most part, cash transfers, livelihood programs, and microfinance, which are the three largest scale and most common women's economic empowerment programs, when they're conducted alone, without training, behavioral change components, or of course, GBV prevention embedded, really are not very effective on IPV prevention. What is also interesting is that the pairing, the bundling that goes with cash transfers, livelihoods, and microfinance, that seems to have a very good effect in terms of reducing intimate partner violence in particular, doesn't need to be necessarily an IPV prevention program per se. It can be a behavioral change or an interaction with the household or the community that tackles gender norms, or that really tries to empower women in a broader sense, not just economically, by giving her the tool of the cash transfer or the livelihood, that instrumental aspect of it, as long as the intervention goes a bit beyond and it really takes a holistic view on empowerment, there can be beneficial effects on reduction of IPV, even though it is not a specific IPV prevention. So we found this quite promising, quite interesting, definitely an area for further inquiry. Of course, affecting power dynamics is important. And also this is very important for IPV reduction, but also for the results on women's economic empowerment per se. So embedding behavioral change, IPV prevention, and training, empowerment makes the intervention more effective in terms of IPV and empowerment, but also in terms of the economic outcomes of interest. Next. We also have some preliminary findings on child marriage. Of course, secondary education completion is, from a structural perspective and in terms of secular trends, the most important intervention to delay marriage for girls, and that remains the case. And it's that's again very consistent with the global evidence. As you know, is secondary education complete, not some secondary, not a bit of secondary, not half of secondary. It has to be complete secondary education. And we also have evidence consistent with the global literature on life skills, adolescent girls types interventions, such as a program in rural Maharashtra, but also the Tejaswini project that the World Bank finances, that really are showing quite a lot of promise. Really adolescent girls empowerment, with safe spaces, with behavioral change embedded, and some economic empowerment, it seems to be quite promising. The issue we're having in terms of identifying what works here, and I hope we can all share in this challenge and move it forward, is that a lot of these programs, particularly the Tejaswini one, are focused on out-of-school girls. So it is very hard for us to know if their effect is additive to completing secondary schooling, or is a substitute, or is an enhancement. It's very hard for us to tell. So of course, we need to try everything to try to really increase the age of marriage. The situation in the region is still terrible. It's changing, but very, very slowly right now. In some countries, the average age is about 16 years. So next. What are we proposing for future research? And of course, after we share the two papers in the next couple of months, the first proposal is not very glamorous, and I hope we can all undertake it with a lot of humility. We have a lot of evaluations, but not the same evaluation has been done in 2 or 3 countries. So the external validity of these evaluations and comparability and really the lessons learned are quite limited by the fact that the evaluations are done in a very specific context that doesn't necessarily translate to other countries. Let's say something that works in India, why should it work in Pakistan? I mean, it's a completely different cultural context. We need longer evaluations. That's very consistent with the global evidence. We need evaluations that take into account the scale of the intervention and the cost. This is, again, this is not very glamorous, but if we have a beautiful pilot that was perfectly designed and shows great impact, that is a first step. That's how we're all learning. But now the next challenge is figuring out if the intervention can be scaled up and how much does it cost. Particularly on women's economic empowerment, there is a selection bias for women who participate in these programs. In other words, it's women who are more apt or have access to this information or are more ready. And what is the implication in terms of their risk of GBV? Of course, a lot of the evaluations are not conducted in the women's economic empowerment world, are not conducted among marginalized groups such as LGBTI and other communities, ethnic minorities, and so forth. And I'll really stop here. I'll leave the slides there for reflection. But I think all the other findings are and proposals are consistent with the global literature. So I'll in the interest of time, let's just leave it for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria Beatriz, for a very clear and kind of exciting presentation. It makes us excited for what we know, but also makes us take a look at all the research that we have left to do and how important having rigorous research is for all of us, and what an important role the World Bank can play in really translating that research into scalable interventions. So that's great. Thank you so much, Maria Beatriz. And now it's my pleasure to moderate the panel discussion with Sangeeta, Beam, Dusita. It's great to see you all past winners of the SVRI World Bank Development Marketplace Award. So thanks for being with us today. We're going to talk a little bit more about the research in Asia and what's missing, what you have learned, and what your hopes are for the research. So Sangeeta, let me start with you. We've known for a while that we need quality health services, that we need quality social protection services for survivors of women of gender-based violence. We need justice and shelter services. But we also don't know a lot about how to deliver quality services sustainably. What important areas of research around service provision do you see that we should prioritize or think about or incorporate into research agendas?
So good evening, everyone. And to begin with, I'd like to thank Liz and Angelica from SVRI and Diana from the World Bank for this opportunity. Thank you for your question, Diana. I'll try and divide the responses into 2 categories. So I think that the sustainability of services and the quality of services are connected, but they still require a different set of indicators as far as any research is concerned. So I'd like to call upon the World Health Organization and its definition for the survivor center services. So if I'm not wrong, in 2013, it was the first time that the first line care was defined as a survivor-centered approach where they underlined a concept called the lives. And the lives is really listen, inquire, validate, enhance safety and support. Now, though it begins with the health sector, the definition of survivor-centered care can easily be emulated by all sectors, whether it be the justice system or the other social protection mechanisms or sectors. So if the research pertaining to quality of services has to be conceptualized, I think it needs to be contextualized in the context of the lives approach. So for example, a broad research question could be, are the different sectors able to deliver quality care based on this approach? The lives approach also then needs to be translated into specific indicators for every sector. So I would definitely call upon two such efforts done in the Indian context. One I would call upon is a document called the Staying Alive document, which is a research based on an assessment of a civil law in India called the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. I think it was done every year for almost 10 years by the Lawyers Collective in collaboration with a host of other organizations. And they really looked at the law from different perspectives and from the lens of all the different sectors, including quality of care. So, I mean, that's one body of evidence that's been built. And I would say more recently in the Indian context, Sehat and Sehaj, another organization in India, brought several civil society organizations under the same platform to collectivize the wisdom of efforts under the service provision for violence against women. And to our knowledge, I think this is the first such effort to really design indicators for what you call as good quality interventions in responding to violence. What would be the base principles for responding to violence? So any assessments, evaluations, research really need to stick to these indicators to really determine is the quality of service good or not. So that's one area. I would also say, as the first presenter mentioned, a dire need for evaluation of programs such as the one-stop centers, which seems to be increasingly the way to go, at least for the LMIC context. In India, there is a huge funding, almost a 1,000 crore funding, which is a recurrent funding post the Nirbhaya episode that happened in Delhi almost 8 years ago. So the one-stop center seems to be like a booth to provide all services under the single roof for a survivor of violence. So the broad research question is it possible? Is it feasible? Is it resource worthy? And are the services based on a certain quality? And there's very little evidence we have from the effectiveness of the quality of care being provided in that context. Coming to the second part of the question, which is around sustainability of services, we know that models of service delivery in any sector have to be in the hardware of that institution. For example, if it's in the health sector, it really needs to be a part of the department, a part of the health services and the package deal being offered by a health system. A similar thing I would say as far as the police is concerned, protection services are concerned, and so on. So the focus here should be, are there any organic links within these sectors to provide services for violence against women? And does the particular system, for example, the justice system or the police system, see these as an integral part of their jobs, of their services? Unless research emulates whether this is a part and parcel of the given job description, it's really going to be hard for us to define what becomes sustainable. And the last point I wanted to mention was women's voices. And the women's voices in research studies really need to go beyond patient or client satisfaction surveys. We really need to gather from there what's their perception of the service that's being provided. Is it really women-centered, survivor-centered? And what are the learnings that we as researchers can really gain from women's experiences of having utilized that service? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you for all those important points. Two that really resonated with me among many that you made is really making service provision, quality service provision, part of the DNA of institutions that are duty bearers for providing services to women, and also the voices, the importance of the voices of women to continue to remind us how we can do better in serving them. So thank you so much, Sangeeta, for all those points. We'll definitely stick to the lives model from the WH. It would be great to drop that link into the chat in case someone's not familiar with that. Bim, let me ask you something. So we know there are a lot of risk factors associated to violence against women, like alcoholism, poverty, witnessing violence in the home. And we also know that governments can probably be investing more in addressing violence against women. How can we support increased investment in addressing well-documented risk factors for intimate partner violence? So we hear a lot now about interest in social norms work, but there's some risk factors that we're not hearing a lot about. So tell us what your experience is or what your hopes could be in terms of the investment and the research around financing interventions to address these well-known risk factors. You're on mute.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thanks, Diana.
Yeah.
Thanks SVRI and WEG for this opportunity. And I do not have really that expertise to talk on the range of things that you asked, and also in a way, the way Sangeeta responded, I think the response has been more focused, whatever that particular area. Whereas when you talk about drivers, it's very difficult to clearly delineate these are the drivers and these are gender norms or broader underlying causes of IPV or broadly gender violence. That makes it all the more difficult to also focus on a particular driver. For example, alcoholism that we mentioned with the grant that we got, we are trying to evaluate the impact of prohibition policy in Bihar. Now we had different states experimenting this policy, but we do not have a very clear documented evidence of what has happened across sections with these, and they just happened. I mean, they were implemented and they are no more there. And why this comes? With what basis? What is that evidence base that this policy is promoted? Is it clearly evidence based or research that is driving this, or what are the policy? What are the underlying assumptions and coming into this particular program? So I think this is a broader sense in which one can talk. But I think for research in general, if you're talking about, I think from research point of view, we need to produce, as Maria pointed out, we do not have very thick evidence. We have things like very sparse writings on many things, and what is now called as very rigorous, using RCTs and all. I think they are very small scale ones. We don't know much how scalable they are and all, but broadly speaking, I think we need to produce very reliable evidence, and there needs to be, of course, funding for this, and that has to happen very systematically. When I mentioned just now on alcohol, we do not have, when we are trying to see what happened, like Gujarat is implementing alcohol prohibitions in law, but we do not know what exactly happens across sections. So therefore, we need to produce reliable evidence, which is methodologically rigorous. When I say methodologically rigorous, it need not be RCTs, but also sensitive to gender inequalities, intersecting other social differences, such as religion, ethnicity, caste, and class. In other words, producing knowledge that takes into account the lived experiences of women and men from varied contexts. Just now, Sangeeta mentioned that. So this brings to the point that Liz has, I read the SVRI document, the report that it produced, that Liz raised the question about challenging the process of knowledge production and the dominant perspectives from the North. For example, homicide rate is often invoked globally in the policy discourse on safety to mark violent cities. But this rate is so low in South Asian countries. For example, in India, it's just 2 per 100,000 population in India. And this does not mean that South Asian countries or South Asian cities are non-violent. So, but violence manifests in different forms. So we need to have that kind of valid evidence. So when the agenda is to decolonize research on VAW, I think we also need to recognize the dominant ideologies and social structures within regional contexts of the global South. For example, Dalit feminists in Indian context, drawing from Black feminists, have argued for intersectionality approach, drawing attention to the heterogeneity among women based in differences in caste and other identities that produce inequalities and marginalization. Therefore, to quote Liz, we should also ensure that researchers are diverse and close to affected communities within the low and middle income countries. So this has implications, for example, how we look at immediate risk factors such as alcoholism, or for example, dowry. I think Maria forgot to mention dowry in South Asian context. How alcoholism or dowry mean for different social classes. Violence against women's association with alcohol may also overlap with economic stress and also a crisis of masculinity among the poor. And dowry, despite its prohibition, may be seen as a gift and safety net for women among better off sections, but it manifests in violence. IPV, dowry demand manifests in IPV among others. So IPV research, or broadly violence against women research, should build strong evidence to show these associations and how these immediate causes of violence can be addressed and sustained. And especially when you're talking about government, I think gender transformative approaches, for example, taking dowry issue head on, may not necessarily appeal to governments. And while some like measures towards women's economic empowerment or education and health may appeal, which are also considered developmentally beneficial at large and have indirect impacts on violence. However, quality research and communication of ideas are the only potential ways to influence governments and policy spending to address causes of violence. And more particularly, I think research findings and ideas for change need to translate into common sense knowledge among the affected communities. And only research ability to reach the affected communities and their own articulation of ideas can have long-lasting results, including government's willingness to adopt policies to address violence against women drivers. Simultaneously, I think addressing the broader, not only looking at immediate drivers or immediate causes, but broader underlying causes of gender inequality, discrimination, and violence against women should be research priority in preventing violence against women. In India, in fact, just Sangeeta mentioned, women's movements, lawyers, actually, they focused a lot on legal reforms and response and specific laws for dowry, domestic violence. But I think we also need to, considering the limited resources in LMICs, research needs to focus on evolving mechanisms that can be institutionalized and have long-lasting impacts, and they need to be prioritized. For example, targeting gender socialization and promoting gender equal ideologies more generally through curricula and behavior change in schools and colleges for children, adolescents, and youth. Yeah, at the same time, targeting in more specific ways what you mentioned, children witnessing IPV at homes. So that's what I'm like. I think we need to have a broader agenda of research covering all these things, and I think we need more quality evidence as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, what else can I say? I agree with everything you say. We do need to broaden our agenda and research. We do need to have more research led from low and middle income countries, with as Sangeeta said and you, Bim, echoed, with the voices, the intersectional voices of the populations that we are serving. And hopefully, I don't know, Maria Beatriz, the World Bank can start financing again some of this research. We continue to explore that, but thank God we have the SVRI to still do it continuously. But we'll try to explore more financing in this area. So thank you so much, Bim. Now let me turn to Dusita. Thank you for joining us, Dusita. Just shifting a little bit the conversation, we talk about intimate partner violence a lot, but violence that sex workers face continues to be an under-researched area, kind of globally, I would say. Although we see small increases in investment here and there, it's still very under-researched. And I was wondering how leading research in this field has changed your work and your view on the importance of researching these kind of under-researched areas of violence against women and girls.
Thank you very much, Diana. And I would start by thank you, World Bank and SVRI for providing me this opportunity to share what we are doing and what we have done with the support from World Bank. It's been some time since 2016-17 that we got support to do a research project with in Thailand on sex worker. Let me answer this question on behalf of my larger team, Dr. Michelle Decker and Jennifer Scholl from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the director of Swing Foundation Thailand, Kun Surang Chanyam and her team, and also my research team. One of my team is also attending this webinar here as well from the Institute for Population and Social Research, Mahidol University. I would say that the research on the issue of sex worker and marginalized population is my vision and mission at all time at my entire research life. And doing the research with the funding from World Bank also confirm that it's important to have research that can unveil the situation that sex workers are facing. And I think it's even important to get more evidence on stigma, discrimination, and violence against sex workers, especially in the setting like Thailand where sex work is illegal. We need evidence to prove how criminalization of sex work has impacted the life of sex workers, not just only impact the work, but their whole life, their safety, their health, and everything. We need to understand the situation, not only when they are sex workers, but we need to explore more on things that may happen to them prior to or after the sex work as well. In this project, we had tried to address the issue of violence by means of community mobilization. Let me tell you the story of this project a little bit. We involve sex workers to act as the health and rights protection volunteers, and we trained them to work together with the police volunteers in the area. This model raised a lot of awareness and have changed attitudes towards sex workers of these legal authorities significantly, I can say. The police volunteers have been changed from the opposition, maybe offenders of the sex worker, to become peers, to become friends, and they can provide help to sex workers in violent situations with a better understanding of the situation, rather than just being authorities who would always take all the faults to the sex worker as before. And another important point that we learned, we think that working with NGO in this kind of research, that we need to address a very sensitive and important issue from a very marginalized or hard to reach, a very difficult, very hidden population. It's very important to work with the NGO. In this project, as I mentioned, that we work with Swing Foundation in Pattaya, and I can say that it's the very crucial part for the success of the project. In fact, the model of getting police volunteers to work together with as partner of the sex worker in the community is the model that Swing had been doing for decades, and we try to find support, find funding, financial support to have this model continues. But even though at some point of time we didn't have the money to support these activities, we still be able to get them together as if the project is funded, because they see the importance, they see the significant how these working together can help them better the situation in the community. I would like to have one key message that I got from my research team, and I think it's very important to talk about it here as well. This project may address this project actually addressed not only the issue of sex worker, but is for the health and safety for women broadly. This project may be sex worker specific research, but female sex workers are also women who have partners, who have concern, not only about themselves, but about their families and their social life and whatever. So many same dynamics of gender-based violence, intimate partner violence also at play for female sex workers. But moreover, female sex workers do have some unique risks related to venue setting, client dynamics, criminalization, law enforcement, accessibility and availability of service that they need. All these must be researched in Thailand and elsewhere as well. And these issues are in my mission and vision, as I mentioned from the beginning, and I'm sure the Institute will continue to support. I'm glad to hear, Diana, when you mentioned there is a little bit increase in the investment to go for the research. So I'll look forward to this, Kara. Thank you very much, Kara.
Thank you, Dusita. And not enough, though, I would say not enough investment. And thank you for reminding us that not only is it important to research the specific vulnerabilities of sex workers, but also understand that they have kind of other forms of violence that they might be experiencing at home, and how this violence in the workplace affects their home life as well is important for us to understand their family health. And so thank you so much, Dusita, for dedicating your life to this type of research. It's really inspiring. Angelica, over to you for a presentation of the overall findings in Asia.
Thank you so much, Diana. So we go back to the PowerPoint. Thanks, Lisa. So thank you to Diana. Thank you for the panel for really great insights on the situation of researching in the Asian continent. So let me tell you a bit about this SVRI grant-making program. In 2014, we began a grant-making program to support researchers in and from low and middle-income countries. And I think that point has been stressed, particularly by BIM now. Our current program provides grants ranging from 40,000 to 200,000 over a 2-year period. So what we do is we put out a call every year. Once a proposal is approved, we continue to provide technical assistance, especially on ethics and research uptake, strengthening the capacity of researchers to think about the essential audiences for their research and how to present findings. We also provide platforms for disseminating research, and we also look for opportunities for networking and impactful discussions to ensure that researchers can reach people, empower, and effect meaningful change. And this is one example, for instance, of the spaces we want to provide. Over the past 8 years, we have provided over $7.2 million to fund 68 research programs in 36 countries across the world. Between 2014 and 2020, in our partnership with the World Bank through their Development Marketplace Award, we provided 15 grants for projects in Asia, and you have heard of some of them already. Next slide, please. We have published a series of regional reports for 3 of our major low and middle income country regions, Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we launched the report for Africa last week. And what we want to do is showcase some of the work we supported in this period. Each report highlights a few of our research projects within the region. So no, it's not everything, not every report that contains every project, but we highlight some of them. For each study, the report identifies the researchers, describes the scope of the work, the knowledge gap addressed, the findings, and the impacts. And lessons for the field, of course. We see these reports as important tools. We believe they will help us reach more people and potential partners and promote the innovative work of researchers in low and middle income settings. So today, I'm very pleased to launch the Asia Regional Report. We are very proud, actually, which discusses 6 projects from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and Thailand. Next slide, please. The first project is from India. A pilot intervention to encourage women to seek assistance from the police was undertaken between 2019 and 2020 by the Abdul Latif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, South Asia, at the Institute for Financial Management and Research Evidence. In the first of its kind, in this collaboration, researchers worked directly with the state police to evaluate the effectiveness of women's help desks as they were being established at 120 police stations. The evaluation was the first in India to work directly, as I said, between the states, and it was a large-scale intervention. The women's help desks were set up across 12 districts, representing around 23 million people. About 300 police trainings were offered. And the baseline and endline service included service of police officers, service of adult citizens, footage from police stations, data from the state's dial 100 emergency response system. So quite a comprehensive study. And so very good impact of this intervention. And on the basis of the evaluation, the researchers told us this year that the Madhya Pradesh State Police have announced that the Women's Help Desk will be introduced in another 700 police stations in all 51 districts of the state. I think it's fascinating. And of course, the power of research of evidence to move politicians and policymakers. And of course, police stations in this case. Second, the other slides, please. Thanks, Lisa. Now moving to Nepal, a study conducted by Equal Access International and Emory University in rural Nepal track the shifts in norms and behaviors that perpetuate intimate partner violence between married couples. The study built on a previous project and aimed to find out how far the change has really spread and how it spread. Overall, the study provides evidence that the change project effectively diffused into the community and began to promote changes around intimate partner violence norms, especially among relationships that were socially and spatially close. The findings suggest that the ways in which social position influence change may be different by gender, suggesting also very, very important and interesting, women's networks serve as a driving force in transforming norms surrounding intimate partner violence, at least with this household campaign. Some lessons for the field include encourage men's involvement. A key challenge faced during the intervention was to meaningfully engage men. So for this reason, many of the activities were organized in the early mornings or at weekends with multiple follow-ups to ensure attendance and support. Reinforce the intervention, which could be obvious, but maybe it's not so obvious sometimes. During the project design, it was expected that the positive norms would diffuse into the community organically once the campaign was launched. However, it was observed that multiple efforts and reinforcements were required for the messages to be internalized. Work with local government authorities. Close coordination with the local ward and municipal offices ensured not only smooth implementation, but also the sustainability of the intervention. And target diffusion methods to create change. The preliminary findings and anecdotal evidence suggest that there is a considerable value in understanding, measuring, and targeting diffusion to enhance the impact of social norms interventions in the long term. Next slide, please. Then moving to this East Asia Pacific region, the Solomon Islands has one of the highest rates of violence against women in the Pacific region, but we know very little about how we can stop this violence. An evaluation of the Safe Families program to shift harmful gender norms and prevent both family violence and intimate partner violence generated vital insights for future interventions. The research consortium partners, Oxfam Australia, the Equality Institute, and Monash University explored specific elements of the Safe Families program, including its collaborative approach to find out how shifts occur in harmful social attitudes related to gender inequality. The initial findings indicate that the program has contributed to social transformation at both personal and community levels. Some lessons from the field from this particular study. The need to set contextually relevant research standards. Different research standards apply to small, isolated communities with a high prevalence of violence, and research standards for ethical and rigorous research into the field should be living documents. And I think this is quite an important lesson for the field also in conflict settings. It's the same situation. They need to create research guidelines for those settings. It is important to develop a set of guidelines for these specific settings, to supplement the WHO guidelines, and to support the capacity of research ethics boards. And also they need to have the practitioners who work in these settings would benefit from building a community of practice of researchers. This should happen alongside greater engagement, of course, at different levels. Next slide. Now, I think, yeah, Lucita already told us about this project, but as she mentioned, she might have mentioned already, violence is severe. The homicide rate for female sex workers is estimated to be 17 times higher than it is for women in the general population. And that's the case in Thailand too. And in this project, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Mahidol University and Swing, the fantastic NGO that was telling us about, adapted the trauma-informed outreach intervention. And of course, I'm not going to tell you, she already told us, so I'm not going to go much to that, but just to say that the intervention was very, very good, and the sex workers responded positively to the integration of topics about violence within ongoing HIV-related outreach. This integration also was received favorably by key stakeholders, including outreach workers and police volunteers in the area where the intervention took place. And I think the CITA emphasized that too, how it changed other people's kind of view about the work of these female workers. Next slide, please. Moving to Bangladesh, which, as Beatrice reminded us, has one of the highest prevalence of violence against women in the continent. This, in many parts of the world, development programs include cash transfers, which evidence shows to be a promising platform to create change around gender-based violence. And Beatrice just shared quite a lot of good insights around this. So this particular study explored the post-program effects on intimate partners' violence on specific components of the transfer program implemented in 500 villages in rural Bangladesh. IFPRI analyzed data from the Transfer Modality Research Initiative, a pilot safety net program implemented by the World Food Programme in rural Bangladesh. Key findings from the research team included women who received cash or food transfer with behavior change communication experienced a 26% drop in violence 6 to 10 months after the program ended, as compared to the control group, which received no cash, food, or behavior change communication. However, there was no impact on intimate partner violence for those receiving transfers only 6 to 10 months after the program. So, of course, these are really very important findings, important implications for cash and food transfer programs, and as Beatrice already was mentioning to us, and we need definitely to understand more how this works. Next slide, please. And last but not least, an innovative program to get boys and girls working together in school action groups to end gender inequality in Papua New Guinea was evaluated and redesigned by Equal Playing Field, which facilitated the intervention, and the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology research team. The school action groups aim to build the advocacy and leadership potential of students aged 13 to 16 years who have completed the 8-week course. So in the end, the idea was to redesign the activities and to include new activities around campaigns and campaigning advocacy around GBV. The findings were very positive also. The level of participation in the school action groups activities increased, indicating that students find this platform engaging. Parental support suggests that the activities are seen to be improving the students' attitudes and behavior. And the schools became more open to facilitating school action groups clubs because they saw the positive changes in the way students engage with one another and became positive peer role models. So this was really a very, very quick tour of the research projects showcasing the reports. I give you a flavor of the relevance and the broad kind of the relevance and impact of the research in the field that has been conducted in the continent. And I think also that is reminding us of so much going on there in terms of research. So I invite you to visit the SVRI website, where you will find the full report and also links to more information on the projects. And back now to Diana for a quick Q&A session with our speakers and panelists. And you can all please type your comments or questions in the chat.
Great. We have very little time for questions, but, and we haven't seen many questions come in. So if you do have a question, please type it for any one of our panelists today, Maria Beatriz, Sangeeta, Bim, Angelica, Dusita. Any one of us are here, happy to respond to any of your questions. You can email at the SVRI at svri@svri.org if you have a question after the panel, either for the World Bank or for us. They know our email addresses, they'll get it to us, but I'll drop mine in there. We have also not a svri.svri, but we have an email address that we can answer your questions. And I hope this just inspires more work in the region. I mean, there's excellent work that has been funded already. Thanks to all of you leading that research, and we're thankful. I know Liz and I are both thankful that we could support some of this amazing research, and really hope that we can continue to support. I know, Liz, you are, but World Bank has to come back to supporting this excellent research, which has really made an impact. I was just telling Liz that this morning I was with another group looking into the cash transfer work that we mentioned in Bangladesh. In the Bangladesh, there's one question that came through with the BCC work. So I know the answer to that question, Angelica. Do you want me to just go ahead? Okay, so the BCC work was weekly. It was done weekly. It was on nutrition, focused on nutrition programming. So the behavior change was around healthy nutrition, around new mothers breastfeeding their children consistently for the first 6 months of life. A lot of nutritional content in the BCC. It didn't have any gender related content, really. It was really done for 50 weeks with high adherence to going to the in-person sessions. If you missed an in-person session, a community worker would go to your house to see if you were okay and to encourage you to come back. So really retained a lot of the participants. Once a month, they would invite husbands and mother-in-laws to the session to also learn about nutrition. And there's a couple different pathways that we think were importantly triggered by inviting the mother-in-law and the husbands into those sessions. But you can read about it more on the SVRI or World Bank website, where we have all of the papers that IFPRI has produced. If not, you can go to IFPRI's webpage as well. The PI for that was Shalini Roy. So she continues to do follow-up research on the BCC, the impact of the BCC in Bangladesh. And I think she reported today that after 4 years, they see a sustained reduction in 50% of IPV in the control, in the group that had the BCC, the group that only received the cash. So it's an exciting intervention. Anyway.
So thank you so much, Diana. I think there was one question from Bim for Maria Beatriz.
Okay.
And then I'll do the closing.
Great. Maria.
Yeah, Maria. No, I was trying to type in the meantime anyway. I'll ask it. Though, so even as there are these efforts to look at cash transfers impacts, particularly targeting towards women. Now, in India, we already have a huge, I think, cash transfer scheme for farmers. I think more than 100 million households are covered in the central scheme. And you have a couple of states rolling out huge money to farmers. But these are all linked to land ownership, which is mostly with men, right? So, and how does this happen? Like, you know, actual, you are only piloting, whereas actual rolling out of cash transfer scheme happened in a big way. I think this is the largest scheme, maybe perhaps in the world, when you're talking about PM Kisan in India. So how do you see, does it reinforce the existing power dynamics, or because you're not taking care of gender here? Yeah.
Maria Beatrice, would you like to answer, or shall we move to closing? Or Deanna, do you want to just jump in to respond there?
I can just share one reflection, Liz, if that's okay. I mean, it's an excellent question, and it will take me a long time to cover it. But, yes, but definitely, look, I think the design of this type of intervention, these big schemes, needs to include gender dynamic considerations more and more. In this particular one, there are subcomponents of the program that are very focused on gender. I think then what you pointed out is it's not enough to just say, okay, we have this scheme that is a land titling scheme or an economic scheme that is at this scale. And then on the side, there are 2 or 3 like sub-programs that focus on women. I think what you're pointing out is like, can we do a better job at integrating a gender perspective for the overall program? Even if we know that a lot of the land titling will go to men because structurally they have the land ownership, they have the documentation and so forth. So while that program specifically does have provisions for women and for women who don't have the documentation and everything, you're very right. These are more kind of sub-programs or targeted kind of components that don't necessarily scale up. So absolutely, no, that is a very, very valid point.
Thank you, and thank you for those questions, and thank you for this incredible panel. I just want to really send out our real gratitude for this incredibly enriching and amazing discussion, highlighting the importance of evidence for policy and practice, highlighting the importance of more diverse voices in these discussions, highlighting the importance that these discussions and the evidence that we're building is rooted firmly in the lives of women and the voices of the people that we're trying to serve, and honouring, I think, even more practice-based knowledge and different forms of knowledge, and challenging the existing hierarchies of knowledge that exist in our field. Maria Beatrice, thank you for providing us with a great reminder of the rich body of knowledge that we already have, but also the journey that we still need to take to build more evidence on how to scale up our interventions and to integrate our programs into large infrastructural development programs. And I think exactly the SVRI and the World Bank Group have a great partnership to play in moving this type of agenda forward. Sangeeta, thank you for reminding us how important the voices of women are in our interventions and programs. And without the voices of women, our interventions and programs are not going to serve the people that we really want to serve the most. And the importance of the provision of quality services. So what is the point of providing services if they don't meet the needs of those that we care about the most? Bim, thank you for asking us for funding a real life experiment to try to work out the extent to which a government policy that is led by real beliefs on the ground with great intentions, and the extent to which that really is going to make a difference for intimate partner violence in the home. And we really look forward to more and more of those sorts of studies, and we can't wait for the final findings of your study coming out. And we have really enjoyed supporting these types of programs and these types of studies. So thank you for that, and really highlighting to us the importance of evidence for informing government policy, so we don't spend a lot of money on something that may not be achieving what we want it to achieve. So thank you for that. And thank you, Desita, for really committing your life to investing time, resources, research into groups of people that are generally not at the table. Their voices aren't heard, and research is a powerful platform for doing that. So thank you for that. And I really want to highlight that this program that Desita is working on is a real good example of how collaborative research partnerships can make such a powerful difference in terms of research findings and activism, improving the lives, and how powerful research can be. I'd like to thank you, Diana. You're amazing as a moderator. Your questions are always insightful and move the agenda forward. And thank you for the bank's partnership forever and ever. And long may it continue in different forms. And I'd like to thank Angelica for bringing us all together and ensuring that the wonderful research that we've been funding in partnership with the World Bank Group has come together in these different series. And Liesl, thank you for your incredible moderation. And finally, I want to thank you, our participants, for joining us for this hour. I'm sorry we've gone over time just a little bit, but thank you for sticking with us for the time and for your questions. Please join us because only together can we make a massive difference to violence against women in the world. And we call on you to help us continue to